Hello, everyone. My name is Kimberly McDonald. I'm the Senior Manager of Academic Programs for Design at California College of the Arts. Before we get started, I'd like to quickly go over some logistics. First, I'd like to show you where the Q&A feature is located at the bottom of your screen. Please use this feature to ask your questions. We may not be able to get to them all, so please be sure to upvote any questions you'd like answered first. Additionally, closed captioning is available during the webinar. Next to Q&A, you should see a button that says Live Transcript. Click the up arrow to show subtitles, open a full transcript, or edit the size of your subtitles. If you have any trouble with this feature, please use the chat and someone on our staff will be able to help you out. Finally, Nina, the program manager for the Design MBA strategy program, will be putting our community agreement into the chat. Please take a moment to read it before we begin, and now I'll hand it over to Helen Maria Nugent.
Thank you, Kimberly. Hi, everyone. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. I'm Helen Maria Nugent. I have the great pleasure of being the Dean of Design here at California College of the Arts. Thanks for joining us tonight for a conversation with Meklit Hadero, Penelope Douglas, and Sara Bahat. This is the fourth event of 7 in our Spring 2021 lecture series. A little tiny bit about CCA, as you see on the screen here. Design at CCA is a sanctuary for those with radical curiosity, a place where your wonder and imagination are amplified through rigorous experimentation and deep craft. Our purpose is to equip makers, thinkers, and doers with the wherewithal to envision alternate futures and the creative capacity to deliver generative solutions that inspire change. In partnership with our colleagues in fine arts, architecture, and the humanities, we make art and design that matters. The design division itself hosts 6 undergraduate programs in fashion, furniture, graphics, illustration, industrial, and interaction design. At the graduate level, we've got 3 programs, an interdisciplinary MFA in design, 1-year MDes in interaction design, and tonight, our host for this event, a very unique and very interesting program, an MBA in design strategy. You're going to see somewhat what that's about tonight. Our campuses are located in Huichin and Yelamu, also known as Oakland and San Francisco, on the unceded territories of the Chochenyo and Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, who have lived continuously upon this land since time immemorial. CCA honors Indigenous peoples past, present, and future here and around the world, and we wish to pay our respects to our local elders with this land acknowledgement. Our speakers this spring series and all of our series of lectures are leading practitioners whose work is reshaping our world, and I really do invite you to enjoy and join us for all of these critical conversations. If you would, please mark your calendars for our next event, which is sponsored by our MFA in Design program. As you can see, on March 2nd at 6 p.m, we have Maki Suzuki, a transdisciplinary, who's going to talk about his transdisciplinary graphic design collective and their exhibition, Which Mirror Do You Want to Lit? And if that doesn't intrigue you, I don't know what will. So my heartfelt thanks, this person on the screen right here is Alejandra Valenzuela, who's a graduate of our MFA in Design program. She created all of the graphics for this series and the original identity too. She calls the concept the electricity of the idea, rays, dots, stitches, representing all sensations and connections generated when creating. And thank you again to Kimberly and Nina for all their hard work behind the scenes. Could Meklit, Penelope, and Sara turn their videos on, please? Hi, hi, hi. It's absolutely wonderful to have you all here. I'm super eager for this conversation and to learn about what you're all doing together at the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts. First, I'd like to quickly introduce Sara Bahat, who is our current chair of the MFA in, the Design MBA program here at California College of the Arts. So Sara came to design looking for new ways to solve problems. She worked in economic development in New York City, then as a bank regulator, and then as a banker. And as she looked at the challenges in economic and community development, she wanted the chance to solve these problems using human-centered creative approaches, and that's what design methods offer. As both an alumni and the chair of the DMBA program, this is very unusual, we're very lucky. She uses her understanding of social systems, economics, and iterative problem solving to sustain art and cultural ecosystems, empower students, and foster productive partnerships. I'm going to hand it over to you, Sarah. Again, thank you both for joining us, and I am really looking forward to the lecture. Enjoy it, everyone.
You guys ready?
Indeed.
So something that these folks who are with us, and I'm kind of excited to be in conversation because I wouldn't want to be lecturing any of the people that I see whose names are over here. Hi, everyone. I wish I could see your faces. Something that people don't know about many of us that are employed at TCA as faculty is that we have an outside practice. It's something that all faculty at TCA do with their time, is spend time with other people and on other things. And these are two women that I spend a lot of time with, working on this question of what does a true active community investment look like? My nexus to them is through Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, where Meklit runs program, and Penelope does, strategy, revenue. Penelope is one of these, I don't know if I should call you a long now thinker, but she's one of these thinkers who compels me to think in new ways and comes from a similar place of community development. And so I thought that we could kick it off. They come from very different backgrounds, and I've never interacted with two women working together as deeply as they do with such different backgrounds on this topic that I care so much about. So I thought maybe we could start off by just hearing a little bit about what drew you to YBCA, and just give us a little idea of what your path to your current position looks like. And Meklit, maybe we can start with you. You're at the top of my screen. Are we all in the same position for one another? If I'm looking up, I see Meklit, and if I'm looking down, I see Penelope. No? Okay. Never mind then. I won't reference that anymore. But Meklit, let's start with you.
Sure thing. Thanks, Sarah. So I am a vocalist and songwriter and composer, and my career has had two sort of distinct spheres. I don't want to call them lanes because they're way more intersected than that. But on the one side, throughout my music career, I have this side of me that's sort of what you might call the music industry or the music ecology, where I write songs and I make albums and I tour them and I make music videos. And then on the other side, I've worked really deeply as a cultural activist, involved in projects and programs and initiatives and organizations that help us think about who we are and where we want to go collectively and how we're going to do that. And I'd always wanted to be a songwriter, and I didn't really know how until I came to San Francisco, and I got swept up in this art scene over 15 years ago that was really about art and creative practice and social impact. And at that point, I was like, that's how I could do it. I saw it, and once I saw that community, it was like every step I took towards music took 10 steps towards me. And it was very, very electric all at once. At the same time, I started co-directing the Red Poppy Art House, which was a tiny little interdisciplinary arts and culture spot in 23rd and Mission in San Francisco. And so the beginning of my career as a musician and the beginning of my career in arts and culture activism was one and the same thing. And that has maintained throughout. And I've had a really long relationship with YBCA. I've done so many things there. I've been an artist that's debuted work there. I've curated performances there. I, as you know, spent 4 years on the board, and I've done like deep community practices and projects with YBCA, specifically with immigrant and East African immigrant populations in Oakland, which I'm from Ethiopia. So that's, bringing basically a beautiful project to Oakland, really shining the power of the East African immigrant community in Oakland, along with YBCA and under the umbrella of YBCA. So, and I came to my role as chief of program. I just had my 1 year anniversary So I come to YBCA with a sense of just like a deep set of relationships and an understanding of the institution and the organization, but also with this space of like, this chief of program role is a role for an artist to be stewarding the institution in this way, and supporting the institution in this way, and always understanding that, growing your own practice as an artist for me has been hand in hand with making space for other artists. And I don't see those things as separate. I see them as one path that has led me to this role at YBCA today.
Thank you. Penelope?
Well, my journey is longer because I'm older, so I'm going to have to go faster. But the things that I want to highlight for all of you is imagine me as a child with a wild imagination who drew and drew and drew and drew, who then went off to university and tried to major in economics, tried to major in literature, tried to major in psychology, and finally called my parents and said, I'm majoring in studio art. And they thanked them, said, that's just fine with us. I got a job. I was the first one in my senior class at university to accept a job teaching art, actually in a small New England school. And then a Great Recession hit of that time. And I was the first to be laid off before I even started that job. This is an important part of my journey because it's what landed me in the world of business, being someone who didn't have another plan, but again, a big mind and maybe sort of the adventurous streak to follow. I joined sort of the typical world of business and grew up that way, but never really lost my myself as a visual artist along the way. So now you have to fast forward to many years later when I co-founded and was the CEO of the first organization in the country actually to determine that it was possible to be both a hybrid investment firm for community development investment and a nonprofit at the same time. So we broke the mold on sort of what the tax code said you could do in terms of building these hybrid structures. Fast forward a bit more, where after working really hard at the thing that I was most proud of all that time, those dozen years, which was really trying to figure out innovative ways to bring wealth to low-income communities around California, not through the typical ways of just piling investment into businesses and hoping that somehow that created jobs, but really trying to think more deeply about wealth, about assets, about what people care about when they say that that they feel rich in the world. Fast forward again, I'm an executive at a conference that grew up to be the largest impact investing conference in the world called SOCAP. And by now I'm pondering these questions of investment much more deeply and trying to figure out why it is that so many social change ideas are accelerated and then go nowhere, and why there's so much replication and duplication of great ideas that also go nowhere. And during that time, I had the kind of wild experience. By then I was getting to know Deborah Cullinan, the CEO at YBCA. We were sort of fellow like thinkers and doers at the co-working space where we both were at the time. And she joined YBCA as its new CEO. And I kind of wanted to tail along. And she offered me a chance to be an artist in residence at YBCA. And I thought, I don't know what that is. And she told me that that would be about inviting the public in, anyone who wished to join me, to ponder a question deeply. And my question to ponder was the value of our labor, which ended up, as the public changed it for me, being the question of why work, which I think is a beautifully profound question, much more interesting than the value of labor, the question of why work. And at the same time, I was a scholar in residence at the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. So here I am, a scholar at the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco in the Community Development Division and an artist in residence at YBCA pondering why work, and grew increasingly frustrated and interested in the question of why we spend trillions of dollars in community investment, and yet the divides and inequities in the United States grew broader and deeper and broader and deeper. So I decided I would look at this differently through an artist's lens. That led to an initiative called Culture Bank. That led to me joining YBCA. That led to a partnership with Meklit, Nothing gives me more pleasure than the days that I get to spend most of my days working alongside Meklit as we marry program and strategy together to try to really understand how we create systems that place artists at the center of investment.
I wish I could be with everybody in the audience. So maybe a couple folks have asked, and I want to just encourage folks to ask clarifying questions to make sure that we frame this properly for you. We spend a fair amount of time together, so we move fast. Could one of you talk a little bit about what YBCA is? Meklit?
Of course. So YBCA is Yerba Buena Center for the Arts. And for those who have not been to us, we have a physical location at 3rd and Mission in San Francisco. We are an interdisciplinary arts center, and we center artists who work in service of their communities. We have multiple gallery spaces and a theater, but more than that, we are a space for people to come together to contemplate the power of arts and culture and to enact programs that bring artists together, that empower artists, invest in artists, and champion their work and their creativity, particularly as it is in service of community health and well-being. And that is YBCA today in a very, very quick nutshell. And of course, there's so many other things to say about who we are as an organization, and we will delve into that over the course of the next hour.
I feel like I should disclaim that I'm the board chair of YBCA, which is my nexus to this organization, and sort of similar to CCA and my role here. It's interesting. Meklit has both been on the board, been a presenting artist, and is now a staff member. Penelope and I both, I think, were exposed to the organization initially as we were fellows. She was examining, I have to refer to you for the question. I was a fellow examining what is freedom? Can we design freedom? And I was looking at economic freedom. She was, Penelope, what was the fellowship you were doing?
Technically called the value of labor, which became
the value of labor.
Right.
And so we were connected during those early days and sort of navigated our paths to spend more time together because we're similar kinds of nerds, I guess. So thank you, Meklit. I guess the next question I want to ask, maybe for Penelope, is, we've seen a lot of conversations in the sort of industry of contemporary art centers in the last year, having to shut down, evaluate, in particular, their models as it pertains to like the ownership of art and the presentation of art and reflecting the communities that they're a part of. I wonder if you could talk us through a little bit the thinking about why a contemporary art center like YBCA might be talking about community investment. Why work with this lady who's working with the San Francisco Fed, pushing them to, bust up CRA. Talk us through a little bit of your thinking there.
Well, first of all, this is also about the leadership of the great Deborah Cullinan, who is our friend and colleague and the CEO of YBCA, and her courage, frankly, in being willing to take on these big questions. But for Meklit, for Sara, for Penelope, the profound kind of underlying kind of question, and Meklit, you can make this better, is if we believe that we're an arts and culture institution that exists as we do, as every institution does in its community physically, YBCA is actually the result of redevelopment in a community. It sits on land that's part of a community. Then we must ask ourselves how we're responsible to our community. And I think for YBCA, under the leadership of Deborah and thankfully aligned thinking among many of us who are stakeholders in the organization, we realized that we had to come to terms with the fact that that it's an extremely exclusive, inaccessible, foundational model, and that and then thankfully for us, as YBCA was already exposing itself to transformation, starting a couple of years back, and trying to think about how to create a more of a home for artists, more of a real home for those who wish to use culture to move people. The crisis of this last year, the multiple crises and movements of this last year really gave us, ironically and importantly, a tailwind to say, now's the time. These inequities are so harshly exposed that we really have to rethink the role that institutions play and how they must transform themselves in order to transform how we think about art and how we think about artists in the context of our responsibility to equitable communities. Meklit, you can make that better, but that's the way I think about it every morning anyway when I get up.
Yeah, I think that, thank you, Penelope. That was beautiful. You know, for a long time now, for several years, YBCA has been thinking about the intersection between arts and social change. I think what's happening now for us, and where this question about the true act of community investment has gotten sharpened, refined, and also really centralized and held at the entire organizational level, is the ways that we see the, you know, as Penelope mentioned, the crises that we've been facing as a society, but also that ability to like dream forward. You know, there was that early article in the pandemic that Arundhati Roy wrote about the pandemic as a portal, and we know that there's no going back. Like there isn't going back, and artists, despite their incredible power to not just champion social change, not just to be catalyzing agents, but to literally bring the people to the future with their, you know, new frames and ways of thinking. But those artists are struggling and suffering, and we saw it like tenfold in the pandemic, of course, but it was not, things were not working beforehand. And so this was our chance to really, really meet the moment, you know, the moment of in a way, the space to transform just became bigger, and also the appetite for transformation became hungrier. And it's like, it has to happen now. If not now, then when?
I wonder if you guys could offer, I mean, I have the benefit of knowing some of the things you've done in the last year with artists. I wonder if you could add some texture to this for folks. I'm thinking about SOCAP, I'm thinking about Creative Core. I'm even thinking about some of the Culture Bank work, Penelope, just to tie together for folks what this means.
Yeah, it's really important to try to make this more concrete for everyone who's with us tonight, and we do every day. Maybe I'll quickly touch on this initiative called Culture Bank, which Deborah, the CEO of YBCA, and I co-founded, and that I led and continue to lead, and that I might actually ask you, Sara, a question or two about Culture Bank too, because I know it's something that you really grok to. But the idea of Culture Bank was born out of the notion that that we have to think about new models and forms of investment if we are in fact to place artists at the center of community investment strategies. For artists, in fact, create the conditions for more productive community investment, because artists are the ones who are able to really lead communities in conversations so that communities can speak for themselves, so that they can determine for themselves what they view the assets of their community are in their terms. And no one is better equipped to do that than the artists who are social change artists working in those communities. But then it's important to sort of lay over that new forms and new strategies of investment, so that we aren't just reverting to listening to communities tell us what they need, and then completing a real estate development project and creating a community agreement and figuring that somehow we've listened, which we have not. We've listened if we have artists lead conversations in communities like West Oakland, which result in 30, 50, 70 really important, very specific ideas about how artists and community members together wish to leverage community assets, those assets that already exist in those communities. In the case of West Oakland, it turned out to be existing space, whether that's Mandela Parkway outdoors, or a community health center, or a building that was Esther's orbit room in the 20s in the jazz era that's left to blight. And it's the artists who help community members decide how to leverage those assets to push back against the forces that want to use the strictly capital system to overlay on top of that a development strategy. And it's very effective. So that's the Culture Bank model. And we've now brought that underneath the YBCA, the beautiful YBCA umbrella, and we're continuing that work. Another great example would be our artist-led giving circle born out of SOCAP, and maybe Meklit, or maybe Sara, maybe one of you would like to talk about that.
Meklit, definitely you. I can say what my favorites are, but I think I need you guys here. Please, let's talk about the post office though.
Yeah, so the artist-led giving circle started when we created and I love to tell this founding story because there's just something in it that really gives you a sense of the nature of the group and their electricity. So we created a cohort for the SOCAP conference of artists who would be part of the SOCAP conference. And as Penelope mentioned before, SOCAP is the largest conference of social investors, folks who are investing for social good in the world. And we wanted to bring a group of artists to be at the center of those conversations around investment. So we did that. And then in our very first meeting, there was like this moment, and I'm getting quiet because that's how it felt. Like you got to lean in a little bit. You got to like feel your way into it in addition to knowing about it. So one of the artists said, so, part of this journey for them was about getting investments in their initiatives, in their enterprises, in their projects. And one of them said, so, but what if one of us gets funded and the rest don't? That's not what if any of us who get funded also support the group? Like, what if funding for any of us means funding for all of us? And it was like that. And it was a sense of collectivity, the sense of a complete rejection of competition as a foundational structure for this group. And they were like, yes, we want collective benefit. And so right then we knew that this group had actually offered us an invitation to get into a deeper relationship with them, a partnership with them. And we were fortunate to have funding from an organization called Start Small. And we went to them and invited them to become an artist-led giving circle. And what that means is that we were able to gift them. And what I mean is gift them, like it is their money, $250,000. These are artists who are working in service of communities in Atlanta, in the Bay Area, in Philadelphia, in Dallas, and in Alaska. And they're the ones with this incredible expertise on what their communities need for their community health and well-being through artistic and creative initiatives and practices. So we said, $250,000, you decide how this money is spent. This is your money, you steward it. And what the idea was is, what if we could truly shift power and decision-making to artists who have that expertise and let them lead us? And so the way that we're formalizing this, and that we have formalized this, is that every step is led by them. We don't tell them what to do with the money, but we also don't tell them how to organize themselves. We don't tell them what the right financial structure is. We're there for technical support, for guidance. We have, fiduciary responsibility according to our charter as a nonprofit. But beyond these specific needs that we have to be this umbrella, to be able to launch them, they are leading us. And so it's literally putting money and power and decision-making in the hands of artists, primarily BIPOC artists who are working in service of their communities. So that's the artist-led giving circle. And it's totally radical. It's a radical experiment.
Well, it reminds me, hearing you guys talk about it, I think of something new every time. And in this case, I think of Penelope a little bit, because it is the polar opposite of the VC model, the traditional VC model, right? Where you have a group of partners, you have to pitch to them multiple times over and over again. And a majority of them in a very traditional way have to agree and say yes to you, right? And some evolved VCs have, decided that any partner can greenlight a deal. And this is this really interesting flip on the whole thing, in that any prospective investment is not competitive, right? They've decided to form a collective, and They don't have to go to anyone for permission, nor do they need like a hierarchy to agree to something and say yes, right? And so what I love about the model is just that it flips the whole damn thing. And fiduciary responsibilities aside, I think it's a really nice exercise in relinquishing control, which is of course part of the power equation. And so do you have any artists that you want to tell us about that are in that crew? I mean, so just so you guys know, sometimes I go into meetings with these guys and I know that they're going to tell me about 20 amazing things that have happened recently. And I can't even tell you how amazing it is to actually meet the artists and humans that they are working with and to, at the end of a sprint, if you will, in design language, to hear the things they've been working on. So can we just give people a flavor of the types of things that you guys are exposed to and hearing about people working on in their communities?
Sure. Well, I'm thinking of Christy Nami Erickson because Sarah, it's one of your favorites, and it's such a great example. And then maybe we should also mention Daryl Ratcliffe in Dallas, partly because, interestingly, Daryl's partner in one of his artistic practices was a member of our Culture Bank pilot in Dallas. So there's a really beautiful kind of flow of systems there as well. But Christy Nami Erickson is in Juneau, Alaska. And her father was and is, a lifetime postal worker. And Christy, growing up as the child of a postman, and being an artist, really began to query deeply the fundamental question of how we create social cohesion. How do we maintain our sense of belonging, our sense of engagement with our community, and the cohesion that our community requires. And as a person who comes from a background that's includes an indigenous ancestry, she really thought this through in a very long way. And so what she did was she basically figured out how to run a very unique post office. And Christy is the post mistress of the most unusual post office that I know so far in the world. And the entire purpose of the post office is to allow the nature of cohesion to take place through the acts that are the most fundamental, is the best way I can put it. So it's the holding of a piece of paper, it's the mailing of a letter, it's the way in which you meet at the post office, and it's the way in which the person who's the post mistress tells you what the weather is that morning. It's everything about the expression of community in a tiny little physical space that's also a real live post office. And Christy manifests the qualities of this collective spirit of everything that I do is for everyone. She would not know how to take in a resource without it being shared across her entire community. So that's Christy. We should probably speak of Daryl as well. Maybe Meklit, I'll let you do that.
And I'll just also say that Kindred Post is an arts and culture space as well. So all kinds of performance.
Activated all the time, right?
It's really hard for me not to want to tell people in Washington that they need to go visit her. I'm not going to lie, because it's amazing. Sorry, keep going.
No, not at all. I love hearing the shine just shined upon Christy Nami Erickson and all of these folks. And Daryl Ratcliffe is based in Dallas. As Penelope said, he is a poet and a writer and an organizer and the principal at Gossipian Investments, which he founded. He also writes for the newspaper in Dallas, and he's the mentee of Rick Lowe, who's one of the, big voices in social practice art. Daryl, for example, with Gossipian Investments, does everything from fund other artists. So he has a fund that actually supports artists with monthly investments. He also has a project where he is looking at redeveloping abandoned malls as hubs for arts and culture and for artists. So he has a real estate arm of what he does. He's a curator and curates festivals, and he is a poet, as I mentioned, and just a person who has such just a 360-degree just understanding of the power of arts and culture. And it's such a pleasure to just listen to him speak about what arts and artists can do and their power.
Yeah, one of the common threads in the conversations, actually, Sarah, I can't help but always think about the way in which you're developing kind of the way in which a board thinks about an arts and culture institution as I think about this. But one of the things that Daryl is really eloquent about, as are many of the other artists that we're fortunate to be in relationship with, is he's very careful and very thoughtful in the way in which he considers the question of power. You know, often when you're in conversations with activists and you speak of power, and I know as a white woman, I'm probably guilty of this myself, you sort of see it as a big problem, but you don't necessarily spend the kind of time and reflection of all the nuances and facets that power can take, and all of the trauma of power. And so one of the things that I personally really benefit from listening to Daryl is the exposition of ways in which we need to think about power that I don't think of myself. When I think of power, I'm often focused on the fact that power and control are born out of fear. So I'm thinking about it from
It's super interesting you say that. There was a post on Twitter last week that I shared with another board member of YBCA, who I'm in this decades-long conversation with about this, Renica. That was, and this is something, I mean, I didn't know we were going to get into this tonight, but we might as well. It's just the three of us and, 19 of our friends. But there was this post that was something to the effect of, and for everybody who's not here, I mean, or who I can't see, you are very much here. You should know that I came into the role of board chair about a year ago. It's the first time I've chaired a board. I have been on many boards, and I immediately, and I didn't really appreciate the shift that would occur as from going from board member to board chair. And I came into it without a playbook, right? Like we were just having board meetings and talking about finance and stuff. And I'm happy to talk about finance. I come from that world, and I'm happy to do things in that kind of rigid way. But, as Helen Maria said at the beginning, I left those ways and came to these new ways. And I immediately found myself extremely uncomfortable with this expectation that some of our fellow board members may have had, that we do something like anything bearing any resemblance to Robert's Rules of Order. I was like, what? No, that's not in the frame of this place at all. And I found myself really asking all these questions about like, well, how should we conduct the business of this board? What feels right? I've been in several different seats in this place, and I want to feel okay, regardless of what seat I'm in, to the point of all of our experiences with YBCA. I think it's one of the things that makes this sort of leadership constellation really fun, is that, we have a lot of empathy for the different roles that we all play in this ecosystem. And I think we all acknowledge that the work that we're doing, like our roles will shift, but we want to remain shoulder to shoulder and not like pull rank on one another in any weird way. So this quote that I got last week was, it's a struggle for me. There are people on the board who are very aligned with this way of thinking. And then there are people who are much more accustomed to being on traditional boards. And I have had my moments where I'm like, and I struggle, like, I think that we all struggle to know what to say at certain points when we see some of this traditional behavior exhibiting itself, and count me included. And I'm learning. So there was this great quote, and it was related to the way white people in particular, and white women in particular, don't speak up when they see misbehavior, because we know how we've been watching for a really long time how bad the behavior is, and we're scared to have it come back on us. And I was like, holy shit, that's the thing. I find myself fearful. And it was this really interesting moment where somebody named something and it created this access point. And I'm really proud of the work that we do together to try to create a less fearful place, right? Where we see each other for the work that we do and the intentions that we bring to the table, and try to listen, because honestly, it's all we can do, right? We can try to do our best and know why we're there. It was super interesting to hear fear and control, and then to just see how that spins out to industries and to other boardrooms, and to just notice that there is this like special little place where we get to experiment with this stuff with like-minded friends, I hope. Okay, how's everybody doing for that? No comments. So one of the things that I think is probably interesting to many of the people around, I mean, I think that we have 15 minutes left. So if you guys have specific questions, please let us know. One of the things that comes up often in academic institutions, as you might appreciate, is just we're marking a lot of territory on how rapidly the field is changing for contemporary art institutions that are grounded in community practice. I wonder if, and I think we've all seen a lot of acceleration in the last year in particular. I wonder if you guys could talk a little bit about how you see us going back to being with one another, how you see the impact of the work that you're doing now, 5 years out. You know, where should a person find themselves if they find themselves curious about this space? You can fight for it if you want. You can both answer this question. You can do it together.
Well, you know, before I answer that question, I did want to just mention creative core, because I thought the creative core is such a strong idea. That's a very different idea of how we're doing this work that we've been talking about doing. And I thought having another concrete example could be really helpful, not just for the artists that we've specifically involved, but how YBCA's initiatives are fulfilling what we've been talking about. So I would love to just quickly touch on the creative core. And the creative core was a pilot that happened in late 2020. And we brought together both Paint the Void, who is an organization that paints murals over storefronts that have been closed during the pandemic. And that was one part of the creative core. And then the other part of the creative core was bringing together, well, Paint the Void was its own organization, and we partnered with them as part of the creative core. So Paint the Void is not the same as YBCA, but we partnered with them. And then we also brought together performing artists. So comedians and theater artists and dancers and circus artists, and brought them into public space to share public health messages that would both help to keep the public safer during this COVID time. So public health messages specifically related to COVID, but also with a sense of bringing joy and participation and just a sense of social cohesion, once again, to our public spaces, so that folks feel more comfortable in public space, and that we could start to address that and start to harness that power of artists and arts to bring us together when we need to do that work of knitting those fibers together that have been stretched during this pandemic. And we're really proud that the creative core was picked up and has been expanded and will be a pilot with the state of California. So there will be a state creative core. I also want to shout out again our CEO, Deborah Cullinan, for her leadership in developing the idea for the creative core, but really thinking about where artists and their abilities to bring folks together, spark joy and participation and communal feeling and collectivity in this in public space really becomes this important touchstone, not just in this time of COVID, but also the way that we transition out of it. I'm really excited to see the expansion into that statewide initiative that's inspired by things like the WPA, which was so instrumental in lifting this country, which was so much a part of the New Deal, and left us with so many cultural treasures that we still think of and that we still reflect on today. So I just wanted to mention the creative core. I thought that
it's really cool that you say it. I mean, what I think in like the zoomed out way is that I often say that YBCA, back when we were going there, was the most interesting room of people I was ever in. And so I just kept going back, right? And I think it's, for people who haven't been there, it's, you know, notable the number of individual humans and groups of people who have found comfort in the walls of YBCA, right? Like I've been to art that's been done, that's been created from gun buyback programs there. I've been to conversation with Alicia Garza and her partner on why they invest in one another's work related to Black Lives Matter. And Alicia's partner works on criminal justice with youth. I've been there with drag queens and Bhangra dancers and like all of the things, and they all come together in one space, right? And this space feels safe. And in a way, what the Creative Core has done is it's taken the energy of a safe place and turned it inside out and put it out into the community for good. And it's super interesting to see what people do when you give them a chance to do that, right?
I think
yeah.
that, sorry, I'm jumping in because I have this vision for 5 years from now, which is very short time from now. And you know, I think if you're at YBCA, you'll actually see and experience a kind of marketplace. You know, you will actually feel like you're part of the experience of the artist at the center of these investment strategies and all the other stakeholders, whether it's health providers or city partners or citizens and residents involved in the generation of the impact that comes from a true ecosystem that will have been developed. And I think 5 years from now, you'll feel that when you visit YBCA. And if you're visiting it this way, digitally, which we'll all be doing too, you know, you won't miss out because you'll still have that that experience of this kind of bustling marketplace. But from a systems perspective, you know, my hope and my belief is that by 5 years from now, there'll be a headline in some beautiful, right, appropriate, you know, journal or paper that describes the fact that that YBCA's and others' work has led to a kind of income stability for artists that transcends any of these specific ideas and has become a system where there is basically just sort of a lifetime of employment for artists in a way that we have not been able to conceive of it in the United States for centuries. And that's tied to the idea that, you know, we'll move from these really important initiatives around kind of recreating the WPA to really understanding what that employment actually looks like. And we'll have been able to prove how directly it ties to community health and well-being. So health organizations will start to invest in these positive determinants of our good health. And I think 5 years from now, we'll all start to witness that. We'll, if you all are interested in careers, you could have careers that have some aspect of that. Some of you who are here with us who might be starting out on a career or early on in your career, I wouldn't have been able to say this 5 years ago, but I believe now that you could imagine yourself in a career that is that kind of interwoven across these interest areas and sectors.
Meklit, do you have anything you want to add to that one?
I do. I feel that, you know, when I think 5 years from now, I think about the value of artists, the value that artists bring to any situation that they walk in, becoming undeniable across sectors and disciplines. So if somebody wants to make a social change action, if somebody from not only a public health but a municipality or, you know, a utility or a university wants to engage in some kind of transformation, whether it's themselves as an organization, whether it's their community, whether it's their institution or their field, or as it relates to the public at large, broadly, like they understand that they need to actually be working with artists to make those changes and transformations, and that artists understand their own power in those systems so that they can be fully aware that the work that they do has resonance and is incredibly important, both as a practice, because I don't want to say, a lot of times when we talk about social change artists, we feel like it's all about the change and it's not about the art, but it's actually what's so important is that it's both hand in hand, side by side, and that the skills that one learns as an artist prime us to actually engage in these change conversations. And that really our work is to bring them together so that this marketplace starts to develop, so that artists grow this understanding, and that also the folks who need these artists start to understand that need and start to really have an appetite for that. And that's where the transformational system comes into being.
We have 7 more minutes. I want to honor the fact that I'm here in my role as a chair of an MBA program for a second and ask just one last question I have 2 last questions. I'll give them both to you and I'll give you guys the floor for the rest of this. But the first is, one thing that we've really seen in the last year is the change in the funding model of who's interested in supporting this work. And I think that would be really interesting to talk about. And then the second thing is, I think we've given people a whiff of this a little bit, but one of the interesting things that I think we engage in with one another and with others is finding a community of practice and supporting others and finding a community of practice. And so I wonder, maybe I want to ask both of you both of those, because I feel like you have different and contrasting and complementary perspectives. But if we only have time for one, Penelope, can I ask you to do the funding question quickly so that we can do the community of practice in a broader way?
Sure, and I'm happy to have Meklit talk about community of practice. I think we actually talk about it in a pretty similar way. But as far as funding models go, yeah, I mean, everything is changing very rapidly, and what we at YBCA are striving to do, and what I think, all of us who are interested in a shared future kind of model have to continue to push on the edges of is how to make good strategic bets to build the bridge to those that are with us today and the opportunities we have today. So that could be the public sector. It's the city of San Francisco right now. It's the state of California. It's certain fairly traditional foundations who have seen a racial justice movement and want to respond, but resonate with the fundamental notion that an artist somehow needs to be at the center of that. So we need to respond to those opportunities, but we're laying the groundwork for a much more important strategy, which is to start to create opportunities for really much more radical partnerships and collaboration. So envisioning ourselves in partnership with corporations that we wouldn't have dreamed of having be interested in Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, nor us in them, frankly, as a step along the way towards a way to have revenue streams that flow to what was traditionally a presenting nonprofit organization that come from a variety of sources and in a variety of forms, just as we are trying to create a variety of forms of the stream of resources that flow to artists themselves. So I feel very hopeful about that. But funding is changing.
There's a question in the chat related to this, which is the typical time frame for YBCA project work. And I want to just ask you, I would answer that by saying that there's the arc of change, and then there's the scope of a project, right? And the arc of change feels like it's on the 5-year horizon or the 10-year horizon, right? I think we'll always find things to, just as humans, to improve, right? It's maybe what we are here for. But could you guys, I think the scope of a project might be a little bit different, like a 6 to 12 month type of a project, but I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about that.
Sorry, I didn't mean to rush. Asking that question is really important because we have to understand that initiatives and projects last, a year or 2 years, maybe 3, and yet what we're trying to build from those initiatives is an arc of change. And so it's a super important question. If we had another hour, we could dive into actually how you have to think that through from the short and the medium and the long term. And definitely a 5-year horizon, a 7-year horizon, and then in my view, a 25-year horizon. So, can't answer it fully, but it's
okay. We all do our best. Okay, we have 3 minutes. Community of practice or Meklit. You can have Meklit's choice because we just talked a lot.
Community of practice. I just strongly feel like a community of practice is what keeps us going, and also what keeps us inspired, but also what allows us to understand where our struggles are not ours alone and how we fit into systems where, we might be feeling a certain kind of pressure or a financial pressure as an artist. And then when you start to feel like, oh, wait, it's all of my artists and community of practice that starts to have, okay, we need a solution that's not one person alone. So I feel like the community of practice is so essential on so many levels. And I also, one of the things that has been so beautiful surprise about this pandemic is how the community of practice has maintained, particularly my community of practice feels like the global aspect of it just feels all that much stronger because we're also talking about systems that aren't just about here. So seeing ourselves in a larger context feels like that really comes from the community of practice as well.
Okay, we have 1 minute. Can I invite some of my community of practice in to thank you? Can I thank the CCA crew and put you guys on the screen? For everybody who's here, we're going to see if we can post a link to the YBCA 100. YBCA has its annual event honoring the people and community members who are doing this work. And it's in early April, right? Do I have that right? April 4th?
April 3rd.
3rd. Kimberly, can we just thank the CCA crew? For those of you who are joining us, Kimberly, Nina, Helen Maria, thank you so much for giving this wonderful work a platform. It allows me to do the work that I do with you guys. And so I appreciate all of you. I'd also just like to note for those of you listening, the CCA crew has all been gotten their first dose of vaccinations in the last 24 hours. So help for educators is on the way, and we might be a little obnoxiously gleeful as a result. Thank you everybody for coming. Any last words, Penelope or Meklit? I feel like I'll see you guys on Tuesday or something. I hope you have a restful weekend.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.